If you want to control people's thoughts, begin by controlling their words. That's totalitarian thinking. It was once completely foreign to America. Not anymore. Increasingly, Americans are forced to use language against their will or even their conscience, or be prepared to suffer the consequences. And those consequences can be dire. Take, for example, the issue of transgenderism, the newest civil rights battle of our time. A decade ago, few people could even tell you what the word transgender meant. Today, expressing the wrong opinion on the issue can cost you your business or job or both. Consider recent state and local actions punishing those who decline to use an individual's pronouns of choice. In 2017, California Governor Jerry Brown signed legislation threatening jail time for healthcare professionals who willfully and repeatedly refuse to use a patient's preferred pronouns. Under guidelines issued in 2015 by New York City's Commission on Human Rights, employers, landlords, and business owners who intentionally use the wrong pronoun with transgender workers and tenants face potential fines of as much as $250,000. That's a steep price for saying he instead of she, or she instead of he, or even he or she instead of they. What about the vast majority of citizens who hold the biology-based view that chromosomes determine your sex, male or female? Or those who have a deep-seated religious conviction that sex is both biological and binary, God's purposeful creation? In December of 2018, Peter Vlaming was fired from his job as a French language teacher in a Virginia school district because he refused to refer to a transgender student by the student's preferred pronouns. Vlaming's Christian belief prevented him from bowing before the notion that the student who had been a she in his class the year before was now suddenly a he. Vlaming was willing to use the student's chosen new name, but he avoided using any pronouns when referring to this student. That wasn't good enough for the school district. They needed to hear him say the words. You don't have to be religious to believe that one person can never be a they. The Supreme Court has clearly decided that compelled speech is not free speech. In West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, the Supreme Court upheld the student's right to refuse to salute an American flag. Justice Robert Jackson wrote, "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, religion, or other matters of opinion." And, Jackson went on to say, the state can't force people to say things they don't believe. But this is precisely what's happening. People are forced to refer to others as they or co or thon. Yes, those are now considered pronouns. What might otherwise be a courtesy now has criminal consequences. In most contexts, I would have no problem addressing others in any manner they chose, and I'm sure most Americans feel the same. But the Constitution's protection of free speech neither begins nor ends with good manners. It extends all the way from rudeness to meekness, protecting those who hurl insults and those who would prefer to say nothing at all. If the state can compel the use of certain words, it can force those who differ into silence. It can force its citizens to parrot beliefs they do not hold. The Fairfax County School District in Virginia removed the phrase biological gender from its curriculum and replaced it with the phrase sex assigned at birth. This is how the left legislates away the concept of biological sex without ever having to make the argument, without ever having to convince anyone. They're trying to make sex assigned at birth as trivial and malleable as name assigned at birth, as if some doctor arbitrarily chose for you on the day you were born. To the extent that the transgender movement seeks to promote compassion for those who struggle with their biological sex, we should be grateful for it. To the extent that it seeks to use government power to regulate our perspectives, commanding that we ignore biology and common sense, we should resist it. This is no small issue. The Constitution guarantees freedom of speech so that political issues can be worked out in the public square. But the activist left doesn't want that conversation to occur. They want to force the adoption of their conclusions before the argument even begins. Compelled speech is the tactic they've chosen. It's unconstitutional, it's undemocratic, and it's wrong. If gender activists prevail, we may be left with a world we neither recognize nor like very much. We won't be able to communicate our displeasure. We will have lost the words. I'm Abigail Schreier for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To help keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
Western civilization. It's been around for a while, but suddenly everybody is talking about it. Some are anxious to save it. Others are happy to see it go. But what exactly is Western civilization? Is it the great cathedrals of Europe or the Nazi concentration camps? Is it the freedoms secured in the U.S. Constitution or chattel slavery? Life-saving medicines or poison gas? The left likes to focus on the bad: genocide, slavery, environmental destruction. But those have been present in every civilization from time immemorial. The positives are unique to the West: religious tolerance, abolition of slavery, universal human rights, the development of the scientific method. These are accomplishments of a scope and scale that only the West can claim. These aren't the only achievements that make the West special and uniquely successful. As Western thought evolved, it secured the rights of women and minorities, lifted billions of people out of poverty, and invented most of the modern world. Progress hasn't been a straight line, of course, but the arc of history is clear. The obvious proof is that the world is overwhelmingly Western. And, with few exceptions, those parts of the world that aren't aspire to be. Why? Why has Western civilization been so successful? There are many reasons, but the best place to start is with the teachings and philosophies that emerged from two ancient cities, Jerusalem and Athens. Jerusalem represents religious revelation as manifested in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the beliefs that a good God created an ordered universe and that this God demands moral behavior from his paramount creation, man. The other city, Athens, represents reason and logic as expressed by the great Greek thinkers, Plato and Aristotle, and many others. These two ways of thinking, revelation and reason, live in constant tension. Judeo-Christian religion posits that there are certain fundamental truths handed down to us by a transcendent being. We didn't invent these truths. We received them from God. The rules he lays down for us are vital for building a functioning, moral civilization and for leading a happy life. Greek thinking posits that we only know truth by what we observe, test, and measure. It is not faith but fact that drives our understanding and exploration of the universe. Western civilization, and only Western civilization, has found a way to balance both religious belief and human reason. Here's how the balance works. The Judeo-Christian tradition teaches that God created an ordered universe, and that we have an obligation to try to make the world better. This offers us purpose and suggests that history moves forward. Most pagan religions taught the opposite, that the universe is illogical and random, and that history is cyclical. History just endlessly repeats itself, in which case, why bother to innovate or create anything new? Second, Judeo-Christian tradition teaches that every human is created in the image of God. That is, each individual's life is infinitely valuable. This seems self-evident to us now, but only because we have lived with this belief for so long. The far more natural belief is that the strong should subjugate the weak, which is precisely what people did in nearly every society in all of history. Only by recognizing the divine in others did we ever move beyond this amoral thinking toward the concern for human rights, democracy, and free enterprise that characterized the West. But Judeo-Christian religion alone didn't build our modern civilization. We also required Greek reason to teach us objective observation, that man has the capacity to search beyond revelation for answers. Greek reason brought us the notion of the natural law, the idea that we could discover the natural purpose, the telos, of everything in creation by looking to its character. Human beings were created with the unique capacity to reason. Therefore, our telos was to reason. By investing reason with so much power, Greek thought became integral to the Western mission. Nowhere is this more perfectly expressed than in the American Revolution, in which the Founding Fathers took the best of the European Enlightenment, with its roots in Greek thought, and the best of Judeo-Christian practice, with its roots in the Bible, and melded them into a whole new political philosophy. Without Judeo-Christian values, we fall into scientific materialism, the belief that physical matter is the only reality, and therefore also fall into nihilism, the belief that life has no meaning, that we're merely stellar dust in a cold universe. Without Greek reason, we fall into fanaticism, the belief that fundamentalist adherence to unprovable principles represents the only path toward meaning. The Soviet Union, Communist China, and other socialist tyrannies rejected faith and murdered 100 million people in the 20th century. Much of the modern Muslim world has embraced faith, but rejected reason. It's noteworthy that when the Muslim world did embrace Greek reason from the 8th to the 14th centuries, it was a leading center for scientific advancement. So again, we need both Jerusalem and Athens, revelation and reason. And yet many want to reject both. These people call themselves progressives. Ironically, they want to take us backwards to a time when man was governed neither by reason nor faith, but by feeling, and therefore back to a time of moral chaos and disorder, of feeling over fact. It would be a fatal mistake to follow the progressives. Stick with Athens and Jerusalem. I'm Ben Shapiro, editor of The Daily Wire and author of The Right Side of History for Prager University.
If what I am about to tell you is true, almost everything we most treasure, freedom, beauty, reason, the family, economic well-being, and even goodness, is in jeopardy. Who or what poses this threat? The answer is the most powerful ideology of the last 100 years, leftism. Not liberalism, leftism, or if you prefer, progressivism. Leftism destroys everything it touches. Here are just a few examples. 1. The universities. Perhaps the most obvious example, one that many liberals acknowledge, is the left's near destruction of most universities as places of learning. In the words of Harvard professor Steven Pinker, an atheist and a liberal, because of the left, quote, universities are becoming laughingstocks of intolerance, unquote. At almost every university, and now high schools and even elementary schools, students are taught to shut down, not debate, those who differ with them, and to rely on feelings rather than reason. 2. The arts. Throughout history, the primary purpose of art was to elevate people through beauty, artistic excellence, and emotional depth. To the left, the primary purpose of art, sculpture, and music is to shock. That's why so much contemporary art is meaningless and involves the scatological, meaning urine and feces. Yes, urine and feces. To give one of countless examples, in 2016, the Guggenheim Museum in New York featured a pure gold working toilet, which visitors were invited to use. The name of the exhibit was America, so one could literally relieve oneself on America. 3. Literature. The English department at the University of Pennsylvania replaced the portrait of the greatest English-language writer who ever lived, William Shakespeare, with a picture of a black lesbian poet. Why? Because he was a white European male. Leftist professors have replaced the pursuit of excellence with the pursuit of diversity. 4. Late-night television. In America, late-night television shows were completely apolitical. The hosts believed their role was to entertain viewers and offer them relief and laughter after a difficult day. No longer, you cannot watch late-night television if you just want to be entertained. Late-night TV is now left-night TV. 5. Religion. The left has ruined much of mainstream Protestantism and Catholicism and non-Orthodox Judaism, which are now little more than left-wing organizations with religious symbols. In many churches and synagogues, one is more likely to hear the clergy talk about political issues than about any other subject, including even the Bible. 6. Free speech. If there was anything virtually every American considered a bedrock value, it was freedom of speech. Yet the left is destroying even this unique American achievement. Almost half of America's young people say they believe in free speech, but not for hate speech. Yet the whole point of free speech is that it allows people to express any political or social position, including what any one of us considers hate speech. And hate speech now means any position the left differs with. 7. Race. America has become the least racist multiracial society in world history. On a daily basis, Americans of every race and ethnicity get along superbly. But the left constantly poisons young minds with angry diatribes about systemic racism, microaggressions, and white privilege. 8. The Boy Scouts. The left is destroying the Boy Scouts. They're not even the Boy Scouts anymore, they're just the Scouts. The left forced them to admit girls. Here's the thing about the left. It only destroys. It doesn't build. The Boy Scouts have helped shape tens of millions of boys into independent, strong, good men. So where's the left-wing version of the Boy Scouts? It doesn't exist. There is none. 9. Male-female. In some ways, scariest of all, the left is committed to ending male and female as distinct categories. Children are increasingly raised not to think of themselves as a boy or a girl. Teachers are told not to refer to their students as boys or girls, just students. In New York City, parents do not have to check off male or female on their newborn's birth certificate. They can check off X. All this imposed gender confusion can only end up producing confused people and a confused society. So why does the left engage in so much destruction? Because it thinks America is essentially a bad country. But America is only bad compared to utopia. And the left is utopian. I'm Dennis Prager.
Year after year, Americans pour billions of dollars into colleges and universities. I'm not talking about the outrageous tuition costs, living expenses, and fees, the debt pit students fall into. And I'm not talking about the tax money, our money colleges and universities get from federal and state governments. I'm talking about the money Americans are handing over to these institutions of their own free will. In 2017, that number was $44 billion. $44 billion in donations in 1 year from alumni and other donors. And for what? To enhance the education of America's youth? Do you really think our college graduates are better educated, more literate, more versed in classical philosophy and American history than they were 10, 20, or 50 years ago? If your child goes to college and spends 4 years partying, skipping class, and playing video games, consider yourself lucky. It's when they actually listen to their radical professors that you're in trouble. So, what have our institutions been doing with all this money? Well, the University of Michigan's Vice Provost of Equity and Inclusion makes $400,000 a year. The university spends close to $11 million annually on diversity and inclusion staff and programs, according to a recent report. What do you think vice provosts of equity and inclusion, and almost all schools have one now, do all day? They, and the small armies they supervise, spend all day, every day, looking for racism, sexism, classism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, and any other phobias they can dream up. If they don't find some bias somewhere, they're out of a job. So guess what? They find it, even where it doesn't exist. The University of California at Santa Cruz now has an, quote, activist in residence. His job is to mint new leftist activists, as if we have a shortage. Why are we voluntarily giving billions and billions of dollars to hopelessly corrupt institutions that overcharge, underdeliver, and undermine the most basic values of Western civilization? We should be starving this beast. Instead, we're feeding it. Are there exceptions to this rule? Colleges that are actually dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom? Of course there are, and they are worthy of your financial support. But you can count them on two hands. The rest have a different mission, and they have more than enough coin to carry it out. The aforementioned University of Michigan has an endowment of $12 billion. But that's small potatoes compared to Yale's $30 billion or Harvard's $40 billion. And donors keep giving them more. It's time to stop. You'd be better throwing your money into a bonfire. That's just a waste. But when you donate to your average university, you're actually hurting your society. You're the reason kids, maybe your kids, are coming home, loving socialism and hating free market capitalism, believing male and female don't objectively exist, excusing rockets being shot into Israel, then blaming Israel for defending itself, romanticizing Che Guevara and reviling George Washington, and dismissing America, arguably the most decent country ever created, as racist, genocidal, imperialist, white supremacist, hate-filled, and misogynistic. Your children are being fed a steady diet of this nihilism in grade school, middle school, and high school. But they have to come home for dinner every night. College is where the leftist deal is sealed. They're free of your influence and under the sway of their leftist professors and leftist peers. Stop supporting institutions that don't support your values, that, in fact, despise your values. And believe me, they despise you when your back is turned. The only thing they love about you is your money. Oh, you might say, I would never give money for all that diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense. I designate my donations to the business school or the medical center. If you think that, you're fooling yourself. Money is fungible. You can designate it for anything you want, but you can't control what the university does with it. I travel around the country every week trying to rescue kids from the leftist cult that is college. It's bad enough that I have to battle administrators, professors, and leftist student body. I shouldn't have to fight you, too. College has become a big business. Most indoctrinate rather than educate. The best way to force them to change is to take away their cash. Your cash. Start today. I'm Charlie Kirk, founder and president of Turning Point USA for Prager University.
This video was made possible by a generous grant from Colorado Christian University, one of the few colleges worthy of your support. Find out more about them at prageru.com/ccu.
The most famous fire in American history happened in Chicago on October 8, 1871. But it's not the fire that is so remarkable. It's what happened afterwards. To understand why, we first need to know something about the city's history. In 1840, Chicago was a small town of 4,500 souls. It ranked 92nd in population in the United States, yet only 3 decades later, by 1870, just a year before the Great Fire, Chicago was closing in on a population of 300,000, making it the 5th biggest city in America and the fastest growing city in the world. What led to all this rapid growth? In 3 words, location, location, location. Chicago was near the center of the country and near where the waterways and railways met, city historian Tim Samuelson notes. It was a perfect place for anything and anyone to get anywhere. Timing had a lot to do with it, too. America was moving from a rural to an industrial power. Chicago was right in the middle of the action. Ironically, its rapid growth was almost its undoing. Chicago had to build and build quickly, and so they built it out of wood, explains Sarah Marcus of the Chicago History Museum. It was quick, it was easy, and it was cheap. And as it turned out, very flammable. By most accounts, the fire started on the city's west side, near the DeKoven Street barn of Patrick and Catherine O'Leary. No one is sure of the cause, but it could have been anything, from vandals to a drunken neighbor to that clumsy cow of urban legend. Within minutes, the blaze roared out of control, tearing through Chicago's business district. The fire was so hot, it created its own tornado of flame. By 3:30 a.m., all hope of saving large parts of the city was gone. Nearly 30 hours later, the fire finally died. The reason? There was nothing left to burn. The losses were staggering. The fire claimed nearly 300 lives, destroyed over 17,000 buildings, covering almost 3.5 square miles, and caused damage of over $200 million, about $3.8 billion today. Roughly a third of the city lay in ruins, and 1 out of every 3 people living in Chicago, nearly 100,000 residents, became homeless overnight. All the law offices were destroyed, all the major hotels were destroyed, all the major department stores were destroyed, and all the major banks were destroyed, Chicago weather historian Tom Skilling notes. In those days, there were no national or state agencies to help. Chicago was on its own. What was to be done? To most of Chicago's citizens, the answer was obvious. Rebuild. Make the city better than ever. Yes, there were many victims of the fire, but there was no sense of victimhood. Even before the bricks stopped smoking, the people of Chicago went to work. First, the damage had to be assessed. The death and destruction were obvious, but there were some major pluses as well. The stockyards and meatpacking plants had been spared. 2/3 of the grain elevators survived. And most importantly, the railway and rail stock escaped major damage. This was critical because it would allow shipments of building materials and private relief aid to come pouring in from across the country and around the world. The banking community quickly rallied. Within 48 hours, 12 of the 29 banks that had burned to the ground were operating in makeshift facilities. Merchants, large and small, immediately set up temporary shops. Local financier Henry Greenbaum sent letters to investment bankers all over the globe. This wasn't the time to give up on the city. It was the time, he told them, to buy in. Many agreed. Among them were creative young architects attracted to the nearly blank slate the city presented to them. They would raise a new city from a new product, steel. Their work, praised and copied all over the world, came to be known as the Chicago School. By 1890, only 20 years after the fire, Chicago's population passed the 1 million mark, becoming the second biggest city in America. The population had more than tripled since the Windy City's darkest night. Why is this all important to know? Because the government didn't rebuild Chicago. Chicago rebuilt Chicago, and with astonishing speed and energy. A can-do spirit, devotion to community, and free market capitalism made it happen. It's impossible to look at this achievement without admiration and more than a bit of nostalgia. Could we summon that same spirit today? Yes, we can. But only if we proudly retell stories like this one that remind us the greatness of America is not a product of government, but a product of self-government, empowered citizens pursuing their own best interests. I'm Lee Habib, host of Our American Stories for Prager University. To help keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
Well, some things that I would like to change, one is the Electoral College.
The Electoral College needs to go.
And maybe we might want to take a look at the whole Electoral College.
I think it needs to be eliminated. I'd like to see us move beyond it, yes.
And that means get rid of the Electoral College.
I want to talk to you about the Electoral College and why it matters. All right, I know this doesn't sound like the most sensational topic of the day, but stay with me because I promise you it's one of the most important. To explain why requires a very brief civics review. The President and Vice President of the United States are not chosen by a nationwide popular vote of the American people. Rather, they are chosen by 538 electors. This process is spelled out in the United States Constitution. Why didn't the founders just make it easy and let the presidential candidate with the most votes claim victory? Why did they create, and why do we continue to need this electoral college? The answer is critical to understanding not only the Electoral College, but also America. The founders had no intention of creating a pure majority rule democracy. They knew from careful study of history what most have forgotten today or never learned. Pure democracies do not work. They implode. Democracy has been colorfully described as two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. In a pure democracy, bare majorities can easily tyrannize the rest of a country. The founders wanted to avoid this at all costs. This is why we have three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. It's why each state has 2 senators, no matter what its population, but also different numbers of representatives based entirely on population. It's why it takes a supermajority in Congress and 3/4 of the states to change the Constitution. And it's why we have the Electoral College. Here's how the Electoral College works. The presidential election happens in 2 phases. The first phase is purely democratic. We hold 51 popular elections every presidential election year, 1 in each state and 1 in D.C. On Election Day in 2012, you may have thought you were voting for Barack Obama or Mitt Romney, but you were really voting for a slate of presidential electors. In Rhode Island, for example, if you voted for Barack Obama, you voted for the state's 4 Democratic electors. If you voted for Mitt Romney, you were really voting for the state's 4 Republican electors. Part 2 of the election is held in December, and it is this December election among the state's 538 electors, not the November election, which officially determines the identity of the next president. At least 270 votes are needed to win. Why is this so important? Because the system encourages coalition building and national campaigning. In order to win, a candidate must have the support of many different types of voters from various parts of the country. Winning only the South or the Midwest is not good enough. You cannot win 270 electoral votes if only one part of the country is supporting you. But if winning were only about getting the most votes, a candidate might concentrate all of his efforts in the biggest cities or the biggest states. Why would that candidate care about what people in West Virginia or Iowa or Montana think? But you might ask, isn't the election really only about the so-called swing states? Actually, no. If nothing else, safe and swing states are constantly changing. California voted safely Republican as recently as 1988. Texas used to vote Democrat. Neither New Hampshire nor Virginia used to be swing states. Most people think that George W. Bush won the 2000 election because of Florida. Well, sort of, but he really won the election because he managed to flip one state which the Democrats thought was safe, West Virginia. Its 4 electoral votes turned out to be decisive. No political party can ignore any state for too long without suffering the consequences. Every state, and therefore every voter in every state, is important. The Electoral College also makes it harder to steal elections. Votes must be stolen in the right state in order to change the outcome of the Electoral College. With so many swing states, this is hard to predict and hard to do. But without the Electoral College, any vote stolen in any precinct in the country could affect the national outcome, even if that vote was easily stolen in the bluest California precinct or the reddest Texas one. The Electoral College is an ingenious method of selecting a president for a great, diverse republic such as our own. It protects against the tyranny of the majority, encourages coalition building, and discourages voter fraud. Our founders were proud of it. We can be too. I'm Tara Ross for Prager University.
I'm a citizen of Denmark, the Disneyland of socialism, where everybody is happy and healthy. Forget the Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, and all those power-mad Marxists who got it wrong. Denmark is the model to follow. There's just one problem. It's a fantasy. For it to be true, Denmark would have to be a socialist country. But it's not. If it were, it would have gone Venezuela a long time ago. Sorry to bring all the new fans of socialism the bad news, but that's the reality. Yes, it's true that Denmark has high taxes and a high level of government spending, key features of a socialist mentality. But in almost every other respect, Denmark is a full-on free market capitalist country. And it has some of the strongest protection of individual property rights in the world. And it's a particularly easy place to open a business. According to the World Bank, there's less bureaucratic red tape in Denmark than in any other country, except for New Zealand and Singapore. And the labor market is less regulated than in most countries. Here's something you probably didn't know. There are no minimum wage laws in Denmark. It's not surprising then, or maybe it is surprising given all the misinformation out there, that Denmark ranks consistently as one of the top-ranked free market economies in the world by the Fraser Institute in Canada and the Heritage Foundation. So if Denmark is not a socialist country, what is it? The answer is pretty straightforward. It's a small capitalist country, about the size and population of Maryland, whose citizens pay oodles in taxes in exchange for oodles in benefits. Well, what's wrong with that, you might ask? Only this. For the government to pay out such benefits, you need citizens to make enough money to pay the necessary taxes. And that's only possible through a free market economy. Let me explain with some Danish history. Denmark, like its Scandinavian neighbors, Sweden and Norway, made a remarkable economic recovery after the Second World War. The combination of a highly productive workforce and, get this, low taxes created a lot of wealth. So, like every other wealthy welfare state, Denmark became wealthy before it created the welfare state. Relative to Europe, Denmark's economic high water mark was in the 1950s. Relative to the US, it was in the early 70s. It was then, in the late 60s and early 70s, that the country's ruling elite became preoccupied with wealth redistribution. But the price paid for this social experiment was steep and swift. The expansion of public spending led to a severe economic crisis. The national debt skyrocketed. It took decades of consolidation, structural reforms, and curtailing of welfare schemes to straighten out this mess. This is the stuff you never hear about from the Danish model crowd. The sharp tax hikes and spending also sparked a widespread popular revolt and led to the emergence of the tax protesters party, Fremskridtspartiet. Even though the party no longer exists, the widespread desire to cut taxes remains. It's worth noting that the welfare state originally began with government pension payments to the elderly. These social security-like payments are now in the process of being overtaken by private pension savings plans, the Danish equivalent to a 401k. That's right. In reality, Denmark is gradually moving away from US-style social security. It can't afford it. Denmark, the so-called socialist model, is returning the responsibility for retirement savings back to its citizens. And what about healthcare? Free, right? Nothing is free. Danes pay for their healthcare through their high taxes. Private healthcare insurance is available, however. It's becoming more and more popular as long wait times associated with government-run medical care becomes less and less popular. But in a welfare state, education is free, right? Well, that's another thing about free. It doesn't mean ideal. Almost 1 in 5 parents in Denmark chooses to send his or her children to private schools, paying part of the bill themselves. Yes, college is free, and even includes a living allowance. But there's a growing problem of getting students to graduate. Many wish to stay students and be supported by the state. One of those welfare state problems socialists don't like to talk about. And again, all this free stuff comes with a price. The average Dane pays 50% of his income in consumption and income taxes. That's right, I said 50%, while earning 15% less than the average American. After taxes, an average American has a 27% higher disposable income than a Dane. Don't get me wrong. Grey winters aside, Denmark has much to recommend it. It's just that being a socialist paradise isn't one of them. I'm Otto Brøns Petersen, economist for the Center of Political Studies in Copenhagen, Denmark, for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To help keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
Every single day, someone of prominence on the left, a politician, a cable news host, an entertainment figure, accuses someone on the right of being a racist. Here are typical examples. MSNBC host Chris Matthews said this: "The age of Jim Crow managed to find a new habitat in the 21st century Republican Party." Comedian Seth Meyers told his late-night audience that Republicans traffic in open racism. Tennessee State Representative London Lamar, a black woman, announced that the entire state of Tennessee is racist, period. This was just after she was elected in Tennessee. The left calling the right racist isn't new. It's been going on for decades. Republican presidents Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, his son George W. Bush, were all accused of being racist. And of course, from the left's perspective, racist is essentially Donald Trump's middle name. To call someone a racist is a very serious charge. A racist is a person who believes that one race is inherently superior or inferior to another. It's not intelligence, character, or values that determine an individual's worth. It's his or her skin color. To say that racism is foolish and stupid, not to mention evil, is to understate the case. But according to most Democrats, Republicans are that stupid and that evil. So let's examine some conservative policies to see if they are indeed racist. If they are, then the left has a valid complaint. And if they're not, then the left is lying. The long-standing conservative opposition to affirmative action is a good place to start. It was Democratic President John F. Kennedy who in 1961 first used the term affirmative action. But affirmative action in the way we think of it now wasn't implemented until 1970, during the administration of a Republican president, Richard Nixon. The theory was that, because of historical discrimination, blacks were at a competitive disadvantage to other races and ethnicities. To erase that disadvantage, standards that most blacks presumably couldn't meet had to be lowered. One could make the case that this policy had some utility when it was first put in place. But that was a long time ago. The conservative position is that blacks have repeatedly proven they can compete with anyone without the benefits of lower standards. There are countless examples of black success in every field at every level. The policy is no longer necessary. But the conservative argument goes further. Study after study shows that, in the case of college admissions, affirmative action hurts more blacks than it helps. By lowering admission standards for blacks and some other minority students, colleges set many of these students up for failure. They get placed in schools for which they are not prepared. And high black dropout rates confirm this view. How could it be otherwise? If academically unprepared white students were admitted to Ivy League schools, they too would be set up to fail. Conservatives believe blacks and other minorities are every bit as capable as whites of succeeding as engineers, surgeons, policemen, businessmen, lawyers, and college students. And therefore, lowering standards for blacks is unnecessary as well as insulting. Yet for this belief, conservatives are called racist. The irony, of course, is that those who accuse conservatives of being racist believe blacks and other minorities are not as capable as whites of succeeding and therefore still need affirmative action, almost a half-century after it was first implemented. Let's look at another issue where this contrast between conservatives and those who accuse them of being racist is even more starkly drawn: voter ID. Conservatives say America should require every voter to present an ID when voting, just as European countries do to help keep their elections honest. Are all these democracies racist? Of course not. Yet the accusers say that conservatives who support voter ID are racist. Why do they say this? Because, they argue, it's really a ruse to prevent blacks and other minorities from voting, since many of them just aren't capable of acquiring an ID. Can you get more condescending than that? Let's be real. You need an ID to drive, to fly, to buy a beer, even to purchase some cold medicines. Whites can do it, but blacks can't? Tell me again who the racists are? One more example. It's conservatives who push for school choice, which would allow all parents, not just wealthy ones, to decide where their children attend school. Tuition vouchers, charter schools, these are conservative initiatives. Those on the left fight these reforms at every turn. It's the left that doesn't trust minority parents to select an appropriate school for their children. Why aren't the people who keep black children in failing schools the racists? At some point, maybe you'll start asking yourself like I did, who's really obsessed with race, the left or the right? And whose policies really hurt blacks? Maybe it's not who you think it is. I'm Derek Green of Project 21 for Prager University. To help keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.